All right. Well, good afternoon. So I hope all of you are jazzed about revolutionary love. Yes? So I'd like to begin today with a mindfulness exercise. And that's basically how I do most of the workshops that I do. So I'd love for you all to settle into your seats, come to a comfortable seated position, place both your feet on the earth below you, place your hands on your lap or on your knees, and bring your eyes to a close, or place it at your gaze at a stationary point in front of you if closing your eyes is uncomfortable. And take a deep breath and exhale. Breathe in, exhale. One more time, breathe in, exhale. Now bring to your mind an image of what a world without racial bias would look like. A world without racial bias. A world without racism. What would that look like? Breathing in, breathing out. What would a world without racial bias feel like? How does that feel in your body? What does a world without racial bias feel like? Maybe notice the colors, the textures, the images in the body, in the mind, in the breath. And after your next exhale, bring your chin to your chest, stretching the back of your neck, and coming back into the sanctuary by opening your eyes. Now, I'd love for you, when you all have pens and papers, just to jot down on your cell phones a few things that might have come up for you. And this is crucial for me because what you saw and what you felt are your visions. And visions are crucial because they direct our mental, physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual energy. Imagine the visions Jesus had. Imagine the visions Muhammad had. Imagine the visions Buddha had. These were the visions. And imagination is so important because it is the first step to manifesting reality. Facebook, someone imagined that. Cell phones, someone imagined that. Landing a man on the moon, someone imagined that. And now all of you, all of us are tasked with the goal of imagining revolutionary love. Because we need you to imagine it so we can manifest it in our world. So for my talk, I'm going to slightly adjust our mandate, I hope that's okay, Jackie, from why revolutionary love to how revolutionary love. I believe that revolutionary love will be the new world order. I believe that revolutionary love will be the new world order. And I believe that because love is the epitome of humanity's journey on the path of transformation. Order, disorder, reorder. Order, disorder, reorder. Order, disorder, reorder. The journey of transformation. Let me explain with a story. So I immigrated to America when I was 10 years old. So we think of immigration as those poor, helpless people fleeing persecution and oppression to seek opportunity here in the West. While that's true for so many people, Syrian refugees today, refugees from the Holocaust, from Vietnam, that wasn't my case. I wasn't brought here by my consent. I was 10 years old. And before that, in India, I had a sense of order. I had dozens of aunties and uncles that would just come to our house. We lived in a joint family daily, moving around. I celebrated all sorts of festivals on the streets of Delhi with my neighbors, lighting candles on Diwali, playing Holi and throwing color everywhere. all of this made sense. I had a sense of order to my life. There was a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And then began the process of disorder. I was plucked away from this existence by my parents, I was 10, and placed into a school in New York. I didn't speak English, certainly had never left India, and most certainly I knew nothing about American middle school culture. So within days, I became an object of ridicule. I apparently worshipped cows. I was dirty. I was stupid. I was ugly. And all of these definitions were predetermined and prepackaged before I even said a word. So I, as a young person, did everything in my bone to create order out of this situation. I resolved to assimilate, to become American. That is to become white as soon as possible. Within a year, I changed my accent, the way I dressed, the way I would approach people. I didn't speak any Indian languages in public. I even went by the name Andy. Deep inside, though, all I sought was belonging, to feel worthy of love and respect, to belong. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if I excelled academically, people would respect me. So I excelled. I was the valedictorian of my high school, graduated the top 1% of my college class. But regardless of where I went, my doctor's office to the New York City subway, I would hear, "Oh, look, bin Laden is here. Why do you worship cows anyway? Why do you speak this way? Why do you dress that way? Where are you really from?" Constantly under scrutiny, constantly judged. More disorder. And the accumulation of these experiences made me feel like an imposter, disconnected from my peers and the country that I now called my own. And I began feeling less than, less deserving, less smart, less attractive, less human. By the time I was in law school, I internalized all this stuff. I felt dissociated and disembodied from my body. I woke up with no energy. I didn't want to do things that I used to love. And my life got very dark. So 8 years ago, I found myself on the edge of my 18th floor window, jumping off, contemplating jumping off. This is the pinnacle of disorder. As I stood there, a strange insight came to me. The stereotypical projections I felt as a person with brown skin, as an immigrant, as a non-European person, are just stories. They're just stories. They're not true. And I realized that what's kept me so depressed and emotionally wounded all these years since I immigrated here was that people are not seeing me, Anu. People are seeing ideas of me. But forget other people. Going back to Valerie's point, I am not seeing me. I am seeing ideas of me. What I didn't share with you earlier is that for years, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a white man. I'd stand in front of a mirror at certain angles that would make my skin look whiter, my eyes lighter. I wasn't seeing me. I was seeing ideas of me. But I don't want to live in a world where we live in ideas of one another. I want to live in a world where we live in the presence of one another, the real people. And that's the beginning of reorder. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. I get off the ledge. A new order emerged. I was birthed anew. And since then, I found a life that's aligned with my new sense of self, one that is about celebration of my being, to truly unleashing my own potential, but also one that is about belonging in this body, especially in a time where our bodies are under attack. Outside the story of race, outside of all ideas of right and wrong, but just here, in this body. Order, disorder, reorder. Now, I am not alone on this path of transformation. Every single one of you in this room has experienced this: birth of a child or death of a loved one. Order, disorder, reorder. Finding a new love, to divorcing the one you had imagined your life with. Order, disorder, reorder. This is the law of nature, the journey of transformation. So similar to my story, and each one of your stories is the story of our humanity. 500 years ago, every single one of our ancestors was part of a culture, a place that operated in its own way. Whether it was the Aztecs in Mexico, to the Tudors in England, the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia, to the Ming in China. Regardless how just or unjust these places were, there was a sense of order. Then, with 1492, began the disorder. With the scientific revolution and the age of exploration on the one hand, and conquest, pillage, enslavement, and extinction of various species on the other. Not only here in America, but across the world. Our nation, the United States of America, was born in the era of disorder. And through this era of disorder emerged a new order, the global paradigm of different human races. In this paradigm, a new story was created, the story of race. This story was anointed as a scientific truth less than 200 years ago by a bunch of guys who loved to collect skulls and body parts of people from across the world. Central to this story was the invention of the category Caucasian. It was based on a skull of a formerly enslaved woman from the country of Georgia. Because it was from the Caucasus, all people with that skin pigmentation were called Caucasian. But simultaneous to that, a story of race was created with 5 simplistic categories: Mongoloid, Africanoid, Americanoid, Caucasoid, and Malayanoid, all these oids to make it sound scientific. But it's pure fiction of mind. But what they did was, all the positive attributes of humanity were prescribed to Europeans. And everyone else, black bodies, brown bodies, Muslim bodies, indigenous bodies, were measured based on their innate pathology. Criminals, lazy, uncivilized, savage. This was the reorder. Never in human history before this time did we measure the character, the content, the intellect, and competencies of a person based purely on their appearance. That's what race became. And this justified horrific acts of slavery and removal of indigenous peoples across the world, from the US and Canada to Australia, New Zealand, to across the Americas. Asian exclusion laws, the Jim Crow laws, apartheid, the scramble of Africa, and colonization of countries from the Middle East to India to Indonesia. And in this new order of different human races emerged the idea of racial bias. Now, there are 2 kinds of racial biases. One is conscious bias, or racism. That's when you've bought yourself into the story of race. You believe in a color-based human hierarchy, and you actually believe that the stereotypes and the stories that accompanies these artificial, fictional categories are real. And second is unconscious bias, which is these are the ingrained habits of thoughts that lead to errors in how we perceive each other and make decisions. And this is what our collective humanity has been infected with from the order of different human races. But as we know, the law of nature is order, disorder, reorder. The good news is each one of you was born in the era of disorder. This is the age of freedom riders, the age of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the global feminist movement, the gay rights movement, and the independence movements of countries across the world, from Jamaica to Algeria, Mozambique to Singapore. This era of disorder is the era of global capitalism, of globalization, and global supply chains. And like my own personal stories, in this era, all of us have tried very hard to create order of this disorder. We have loved across the color line, we've become allies to many marginalized groups, we've marched for Black lives, we've opposed corporate greed at Occupy Wall Street, and even our institutions have tried to address this through anti-discrimination laws, through diversity protocols and procedures, through affirmative action programs, but to what end? Despite all these laws, we live in a hyper-segregated country. 2/3 of Americans need to move neighborhoods for us to be fully integrated. Judges sentence Black men on average 18 months longer than white men for identical crimes. Doctors are prescribing medication at a lower rates to darker-skinned patients, particularly pain medication, than white patients. Teachers are suspending children of color at rates 3 or 4 times higher than white children. And the racial wage gap is the highest it's ever been in 36 years. And of course, we're living in a world where threats of wars and walls, hate crimes and bigotry, violence and terror looms everywhere. I see you, Jackie. But the root cause of this is this fictional story of race. Now, this begs a question, from this period of disorder, can we create a new order? This is the order of revolutionary love. And I believe we can. And this is the work our ancestors started, what Valerie and Jackie laid out. Think about it this way. Our entire life thus far has been a dress rehearsal. Now it's showtime. Think about it this way. From a fairy tale metaphor, the beast of racism and racial bias is out. And as Beyonce would say, we all have to show up to slay. This is it. This is where we are. So how do we do that? For me personally, it's through breaking bias. Bias is merely an algorithm of the mind that can be hacked. And it's a product of our conditioning. So while there's conscious racial biases, which are just belief systems, the vast majority of reasons why there's so much racial disparity in our country is because of unconscious bias. Our brain has been trained to have this algorithm. The second we see a physical manifestation, we have certain associations based on the story of race. So what we have to do is cleanse our brains. We have to cleanse our nervous systems of this bias. And the cool thing is we can do it. Science has advanced way beyond. We have the research, the technology, and the resources to make this happen. What we need is a will, a collective will. And that's what I do full-time, every day at Be More America. We basically train leaders across industries to hack bias, to overcome these biases. And then we just have to keep on repeating them. So how many of you are in this journey for revolutionary love, this new order to break bias? Yes, no, yes, yes. Great. I believe that if we can land a person on the moon, if we can create artificial intelligence, if we can have virtual assistants like Alexa, breaking bias is a thing of the past. And I have a challenge for you. I want us to break bias by 2040. Eradicate bias in our world by 2040. This is what's going to require for the new order of revolutionary love to become a public ethic. Eradicate bias by 2040. How many of you are with me? Eradicate bias by 2040. And it's going to require all of us to let go of judgments, of control, and move away from the tactics of shame, blame, and guilt, which prevent behavior change. And move towards what Pope Francis called compassion, humility, and tenderness. He talks about this new order of revolutionary love as the age of humility and tenderness. And this is what we need to do. I want you to go back to the vision you all had in the beginning. take a breath, and imagine again, what would a world without racial bias look like? What would a world without racial bias feel like? You may not know yet, but you're already breaking bias because you're here. You're committed to revolutionary love. And I believe that in the line of all the ancestors, as Dr. King said, we will create that inclusive, beloved community. But that's going to require a shift in our hearts as well as our lives. And it's up to us to make that happen. It's time for revolutionary love, so let's break bias. Let's be more America. Thanks so much.